Hi there.
Hello.
Can you tell if I'm on?
You're on. We can hear you.
Oh, thank you. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
Woo. All right. Tablet of paper here.
You have a couple minutes for everyone to join in here.
I didn't receive a meeting code, so I'm just using my phone.
Oh, no. Well, you can hear us loud and clear, can't you?
I can, yes. Can you see me okay?
Um,
I'm waving right now. Woo.
I don't, but there's
Yeah,
a lot of people joining. I got 4 different screens to flip through.
that's fine, long as I can hear. There's a lot of questions we all have, that's for sure.
Yeah, good.
I mean, not questions, but, curious how this is going to play.
Sure. We may not have all the answers for that, but
No, understood. Oh.
hey, Rich, I see you there.
Hello there. I didn't realize I was unpictured.
You are. We see you. Good morning. There you go.
Looking good, Rich.
I try.
Yeah.
Sorry I didn't make it to TPIE this year.
Missed you.
Well, it was between TPIE or a Belma business meeting in Palm Springs, California. TPIE probably was warmer.
I bet it was.
Palm Springs was a little chilly in January when we were there.
You guys remember it was cold down in Fort Lauderdale this year, too.
Was it
Cold
down
and
there
cloudy.
too?
Yeah.
Mhm.
It was cold.
Right, we'll give about 30 more seconds to still see people hopping on here. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning or good afternoon, or anything in between. This is going to be recorded, and we'll get that sent out to folks. We do have some joining from other countries as well, so quite amazed by that. We sent this out late last week, and really just a heart and a desire to have a discussion on what's going on and based off of that reality, what we can do in light of that. And as of earlier this morning, we had 110 people register from 73 different companies. So really blown away by that. For those of us presenting, no pressure. But excited and not often that we're able to get this many interiorscapers together. Certainly highlights the fact that this is a hot topic. There are probably more questions than answers out there. But at the end of the day, we as leaders have to take those facts in front of us and decide what it is that we are going to do with that. As I was talking to Jason earlier, you can fight, you can flight, you can freeze, you can appease. And for us, we're like, we just need to go right through it. We need to look at the options on the table, make a good decision and see where that puts us, and then make the next great decision. So my name is Josh Suniff. I am the CEO of Natura. We also have joining us Jacob Rodriguez. He is the COO. He's going to dive through just some of the priorities that we're looking at, how we're looking at making decisions based off of what we're faced with. We also have Mike Seniff, company founder, joining us, along with Jason Feynman. He's the CEO of ASI. I think we all know him. Hey, Jason.
Hey, everybody.
We have John Pierre, their VP of sales, certainly close to just a lot of the questions and issues that are coming up with tariffs. And then Caroline Puller with Seasonscapes. We all know that there are not many options out there in terms of where we go about getting our holiday decor. China certainly is one of the biggest ones. And so that brings us to our discussion today, which is certainly on tariffs and what it is that we're going to do in light of that. We do have Q&A open. So if you're not familiar with the Teams webinar experience, hunt around for a Q&A button. You are free to type in questions that you have right there. We may not be able to get to all of them, but I encourage you to go about doing that. You also have access to the chat where you can just put in other questions as well. Not sure why you'd use one or the other. I guess I'd say go ahead and use the Q&A feature right there. We'll be monitoring that and then asking those questions towards the end. What this is not going to be is a political debate. Certainly there are valid thoughts on both sides of that coin, but we're going to try to not go there. We're going to look at what it is that we're faced with as an industry, from our horticultural products, from our decorative containers, and from our holiday decor. And so to dive into that, probably nobody better than Jason to help share with us what it is that we need to know about tariffs, the fact that they've been in place, what we're dealing with right now, and what we see on the supply side as options for us. So Jason, appreciate you joining us, and take it away.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you to Natura for hosting this and for inviting me to speak. I really appreciate the opportunity. Many of you probably know that ASI owns our own facility in China. It's a bit unique compared to some of the other manufacturers out there, in that it is our own employees that we work with. And we have about 90 staff who are there. And in some ways, this has definitely been in the making, right? So I guess we should go to a bit of a background on tariffs and talk about the various tariffs that importers face. So the first thing I'm going to be a little bit basic, so forgive me on that. But the person who pays the tariff is the importer of record, and it's the person who bears the responsibility for importing things under the right codes, such as a HTS code or harmonized tariff schedule. And they also are responsible for paying the duty. So sometimes there's different terms that people buy under. Sometimes your vendor, if you're buying direct from another country, will pay the duty for you on your behalf, and you can buy under those terms. But the much more common case is that the company in the US who's importing is going to pay the tariff. And different products have different tariffs depending on what good they are. And most concretely for our business, we have different tariff codes for our plastic products, fiberglass products, and our clay products. So there is some generalized duty rates. That's the first layer of duty that everyone faces. There are free trade agreements that the US has established with certain countries. There's the USMCA. There's also, certain countries like Chile, for example, which has a free trade agreement. And you can Google this if you want to look up a certain HTS code. If you're doing any importing, there's also a great resource to find out what HTS codes have been determined for a product that you're interested in importing. It's called CROSS. And you can actually look at prior customs cases in that database. So let's say you were interested in importing fiberglass planters. You could type in fiberglass planters and see what HTS codes US Customs has determined would apply to that good for another company. So a company submits their case, and then that case becomes public knowledge. Now, let's say there's something proprietary about what you do, they might redline some of it and omit details. If it was going to put you at a competitive disadvantage, some IP, for example, maybe you have a secret sauce. So at any rate, the first level of duty that we all pay is generalized duty. And for us, that happens to vary between some of our items are free, our fiber clay items are free, and then our fiberglass is around 3.5% duty. Then in the first Trump administration back in 2018, 2019, there were some tariffs that were put into place specifically around China. Those were called Section 301 tariffs, and they varied. I think there were some medical devices. I should preface this and say I'm not an import expert or a tariff expert. I just know what I know from attending a few seminars. But for us, practically speaking, those duties vary between 7.5% and 25%. And we've dealt with those over the years. And that was really the first signal that, it might be time to think about trying to look at other sources of supply. But as many of you know, if you have a factory, it's always more efficient to run as much volume as you possibly can through the factory to keep the overhead down. And China happens to have very, very strong labor contracts and employee rights. So it's not so easy to just cancel contracts. Just for example, to let go of one employee in China, you could end up having to pay around a year's salary for that employee. So it's not just a simple pull out, right? And it can be very difficult to do that in phases. So that was the Section 301 tariff. So again, we have general duty, then Section 301. The next duty that came into play really started this year, and that was called the IEEPA duty. So that's the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And this started coming into play early in the year before the reciprocal tariffs. They started off at 10% on China, and then were later up to 20%. And those are in effect now. So those are being paid when we import our goods. And just a point on that, it's on the cost that we pay as the importer. So it's our cost of goods sold, not what we're selling the product for. So then, finally, as I'm sure everyone remembers Liberation Day, because that's the hot topic why we're all here, that's when the reciprocal tariffs were announced. And that was in addition to the IEEPA. So the first round for China was 34%. And I actually might have a chart of all the different countries that were announced on that. Let me just pull that up here. Do I have the right to share a screen on this, Josh?
Yeah, you should.
Okay, give me one moment here if I can juggle the screens. All right. So this is from a brokerage firm from a seminar that I attended, and these were the tariffs that were announced on the reciprocal side from high to low, and the number one on the list was Vietnam. And the reason for that is a lot of companies adopted a China plus one strategy because it's very easy for Chinese citizens to get visas to go to Vietnam. And so it seems sort of like the next step labor's fairly inexpensive and the raw materials are still achievable, although a lot of them are still sourced from China. And then the list sort of goes down from there. But you can Google this and get what the individual reciprocal tariffs were. I don't know much about the math behind how the administration calculated these, but I understand it is available. And I think even the Senates were working on following that math at one point. So they might be able to answer that.
No,
At any
it's,
rate-
it's a wild formula with characters you probably don't recognize.
Okay. So at any rate, this is just a smattering of all of the reciprocal tariffs. These have since been paused for a 90-day period, which expires in July, and have been reduced to 10%. So the 10% is in effect. And at any rate, I'll just stop sharing there so we can get back to face-to-face. So, as things started going back and forth with China was really the only one who, I guess, decided to take a very hard stance. And we're all kind of wondering how this is going to play out. And I'm sure we all have our own bets to place there. But it's now up to 125% reciprocal tariff. So if you start doing the math, you're looking at 3.4% plus the whatever the old Section 301 tariffs were, 7.5% to 25%, plus 20%, plus the 125%.
Oh.
So it's not
Jesus.
just 145%, it's 145% plus everything that happened in 2018. So it is, it's extremely important for us to try and find other avenues where we can produce as a company, and we're rapidly exploring those. But it takes time. As I mentioned, you're winding back a lot of, I have 90 staff who are in China. And so that's the trick there. And, I'm happy to answer questions about that. I guess, let me just go back to my notes here. I think that's the main points that I wanted to cover around duty. I'm happy to answer any other questions around it. So some people might be curious. So what could you do as a strategy to try and reduce your tariffs? Given, 150%, imagine your COGS go to 2.5%, 2.5x. That's huge, right? How do you respond as a business owner to something like that? So you might think, oh, well, we'll ship the stuff to Vietnam, and then now it's made in Vietnam. With tariffs, that's not really how it works. It's based on the country of origin of the good. So it has to undergo what's called substantial transformation in order to get a new country of origin. And substantial transformation, what does that mean? That term's kind of vague, right? So I'll give a couple of examples of substantial transformation. So there's the thought of, have you fundamentally changed the nature of the good? So if you were to take flower pots, for example, in their unfinished form, they haven't been trimmed, they haven't been sanded. Well, trimming them wouldn't be enough, right? Painting them a new color wouldn't be enough because it was a flower pot as it started, just not finished, and it's a flower pot when it ended. The fundamental nature of the good didn't change. To go outside of our industry for a moment, crankshafts, an example would be diesel crankshafts, manufactured in Brazil and then shipped to Mexico. In Mexico, they do a heat treat process. It goes through 25 different heat treats. And then they finish, they polish, they drill for final assembly. That is not considered substantial transformation because that is finishing. Assembly, circuit boards, that's a big thing with the use of chips. If you bring in different parts from a bunch of different countries, you assemble the microchip board. The mere assembly of that board, even soldering it, is just considered assembly. It's not substantial transformation. However, if you reprogram that board to go into a computer, you have fundamentally changed it in a substantial transformation because it has gone from being just a bunch of electronic components to being a smart device. So, that sort of substantial transformation is a delicate one. The risk falls on the importer. And you really have to apply with the government to get a valid ruling on whether or not you've met the requirements of substantial transformation. And I'll leave it to you to guess how long it takes to get a response from the government on that. So I think that's the main things to cover. I'll mention a little bit in terms of timeline for when on the Chinese side, because that's obviously the one that I'm most intimate on, when these tariffs start taking effect. So we pay duties as the products clear customs, which is actually before they hit the water. That's when they're getting charged. So anything exported prior to April 5th is, so anything that left China prior to April 5th is subject to the 20% IEEPA tariff. Items that were exported from China between April 5th and April 9th are subject to the 20% IEEPA tariff and the 10% reciprocal. This is always in addition to the prior 301s in generalized duty. And then anything exported after the 10th is subject to the full 125% reciprocal tariff plus 20% IEEPA plus 301 plus general duty. So that's where it starts getting north of 150%. And it's a little, you can always slow down the production, but you can't slow it down to the point where you end up ruining your service, right? Because you all want to call us and make sure that, when the planters are available, and we want to make sure that we can continue to provide the service that you guys deserve. So, there's probably going to be, from our end, focusing more on the core products, making sure that those are always in stock, and maybe some of the more ancillary products, symmetries, tiers, things like that are less frequently ordered will fall a bit more to the wayside. Lead times might be longer on those. And that's really how, we're thinking about it. Beyond that, it's you're taking gambles. You can try and push product to Canada and hold it in warehouses in Canada, but you're betting that the tariffs will be reduced at a later date. And again, we don't know if that's going to be within a month. We don't know if that's going to be a year from now. We don't know if they're going to go up. It's really anybody's guess. And that pretty much concludes my remarks. I'm curious to see what questions come through the chat, but thank you again for the time.
Thank you, Jason. Super informative. And I think we're going to get a little bit deeper into that here shortly with Jacob. But you talked about looking at alternatives for manufacturing. What type of timeline, does that look like? And I know your guess is probably as good as anyone. Certainly a lot of people are trying to, look at moving manufacturing. I think, to a lot of us, our minds go to, well, cool, just bring it to another country, and then import it. You just talked about that. That's not, it doesn't transform the product enough. Mexico seems to be a good option. What are you faced with in looking at, different costs of materials and labor costs and things like that?
Yeah, we've been interested in Mexico for a while. We've looked at it, we've modeled it. So labor rates in Mexico are around $8 an hour right now. Labor rates in China are at around $280 fully burdened. And I'd say Vietnam and India, Vietnam's a little bit more, is probably in between India and China. India is around $1 an hour. And I don't know the exact ones on Vietnam. But so that's a challenge right there. Of course, we've also thought about producing in the US, which might make sense for much larger product that you can't put on a shipping container. So, I mean, just think about $8 an hour versus, let's just call it $2 an hour or $3 an hour. You're talking about a factor of 4x, 3x.
Right.
That's just labor. And by the way, if you look at an average earth wall in our totally optimized production process, which we run it like an American factory, right? We've got KPIs for every step in the process. We probably, an average earth wall of 36, 14, 24 takes us 6.5 hours worth of labor. And that's with it being passed down an assembly line. If you tried to build it from
Mhm.
scratch, it'd probably take you about 4 times that long. So labor is a huge portion of what goes into making the product. Then there's the resin. So resin is the main input into fiberglass, and that product throughout Asia is essentially the same price of around 60 to 80 cents a pound. In Mexico, most of it has to be imported from the U.S. at over $2 a pound. So it's more than 2x there. So if you just start, you're looking at the main inputs, right? These things
Yeah.
are so expensive locally that the containers would just be priced out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's still potentially cheaper if tariffs stay where they're at.
Yeah. You're better off just accepting a price increase on that. But to the extent that or shifting products to something that's less labor intensive. We've looked at 3D printing, and that's an interesting potential avenue. Injection molding, the raw materials again are still going to be more expensive in the US. And that's something that is easier to shift timeline wise if you can get the molds. Part of the challenges are the size of the machines have to match up. You have to convince people to give up the molds. Even if you own the molds, you have to logistically figure out how to move them and work and maybe, pay for that to be moved, which can be done. But, then you're talking about maybe a month of transit times, then set up and start running. And of course, you have to identify who those suppliers are going to be. So I guess what I would say in terms of timeline is that, it takes a few months to really even get started producing product and to shift volume. So, the fastest you could ever imagine doing it would be like 3 months, right? I think when we started China, we shipped our first container in 2 months, and we were living in China. I wasn't, obviously, I was in high school, but Phil and Steve were living in China, and they would take, one would go for 2 weeks, then come home, and the other one would be there for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's all hands on deck, right?
Yeah.
So I think you could start.
So you're going to beat the
shifting
the 2 month.
Well, I'm in Asia right now, so I'm hustling. I've been here for a week, and we're rapidly working to move it so that we can diversify our supply chain, make a few bets on different countries, right? See where this is going to end up in 90 days. Like all of you, we're not sure. Is a deal going to be negotiated with Vietnam? Maybe not. It's been called one of the worst offenders because of the Chinese products coming through Vietnam. India had a really favorable rate. I think, I like them as a country, but this is getting a little bit political, but just it's a democracy. It lines up with US values. There's, in terms of how India and China relations will always be somewhat tenuous with the shared border. So I think in the world order of what we look at over the next decade or two, I think this could be their decade. I mean, it's a huge population, over 1 billion people, and just a tremendous amount of infrastructure projects happening in India. Lots of people, I think, are excited about what they're, calling it India's decade.
Yeah.
So.
Very good. I want to pause and see if there's any questions yet. I don't have that in front of me.
Jason, there was a question about, and I know this is probably a pretty complicated question, more complicated than we realize, is what do you anticipate the end user, us, having as an increase with those tariffs fully? And I think it's great understanding that 145% tariff does not mean 145% increase in cost to us. Right, it's that first cost coming out, and
right.
For you have other costs on top of that after the fact, right? So, do you have any idea as to what that could be, or an average of that?
Yeah, sure. I can give some idea of a range. So, I mean, that's a complicated question, right? Because there's market dynamics. We're definitely, I guess, if it was a card game, I think we were dealt a difficult hand. We might have had some making in the hand and not getting out fast enough. And, that's our responsibility. But I've, highlighted why that's a challenge. I've got people who are like family to me there. You know, the guy who's running it, his kid just made it into med school. So it's a very close relationship, as I'm sure many of you have with your employees. But getting back to the root of your question, you know, how does it affect you in terms of pricing? Part of it will be a judgment on our case of, you know, we don't want to lose market share to our competitors who aren't producing in China and are not subject to the tariffs. Right now, I should say they're subject to 10% tariffs, but the rest of the world has a pause. We do not. And I would say probably somewhere between 5 and 15% on the high end. And that's with us, you know, taking on a good chunk and just saying, you know what, we're gonna eat some of this. We're gonna try and make up for efficiencies elsewhere within our overhead. We're a pretty lean machine as it is, but you know, we'll figure out other efficiencies. You know, we might ask for people if you're willing to convert to paying by check. You know, just things like that, little things that we can do as a partner. But you know, our aim is, we've been in this industry for a long time, and we want to be here in the future. We value the relationships we have with landscapers. I think we're probably the only ones who in the industry that only sell through resellers. We have no direct sales to end users, which means we operate at a lower margin than our competition. And I'm not singling out any competitor in that regard. It's just our business model, right? We're plantscaper heavy. You know, there's not a lot of GCs that we go to. So, you know.
Yeah. Well, we need you and you need us. And so we get that. Appreciate, you know, your share in the tariffs there. So really what I hear is just what you're sharing with the reality of what's going on in China, looking into other alternatives. And I know you don't have a timeline on that, but certainly there are some great options out there, and you'll share more as you uncover that. And then a 5 to 15% potential increase on our product costs.
Yeah, I mean, it could still go up with
Sure.
tariffs. I'm just quoting based on 150% and trying to do math around what, you know, I think we could sustain for X number of months, and you know, looking at our cash reserves.
Yeah. Well, I guess I should have caveated all this with everything could change tomorrow. It probably won't, but it could. Donna, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah. Hi, Jason. Hey, so does this affect like the pottery line as much as it will the fiberglass line?
Yeah, all of our product is made by us. We own all of our own production, and that includes the fiber clay. The fiber clay is a 0% general duty, but a 25% Section 301. So everything's faced with it. Really, the only thing beyond that would be metal, but ASI doesn't really carry too much metal.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question.
Thank you.
All right, great. I'd like to shift gears a little bit into holiday decor. Certainly, many of us have a lot of exposure as it relates to importing of our Christmas decor. And so I'm going to pass this over to Jacob and Caroline. We at Natura have been in extensive conversations. We bring in about 10 containers or so. Most of that does, in fact, come from China. And so I want to let you guys highlight what it is that we're hearing from the importers of the holiday decor. And at the end of the day, we're going to wrap this up on you know, what it is that we feel like we should do in light of that. So Caroline, I see you front and center, and Jacob as well.
Okay, I had to unmute myself. Didn't want any background noise. Hi, everybody. Hope everybody is well and having a great Monday and had a great Easter. Again, Josh, Natura, thanks for putting this together. I think it just shows the importance of what everybody's feeling right now. and Jacob, feel free to jump in, but last week I spoke to three of what I would call some of the largest Christmas importers. I am not going to mention names or anything like that, but I can kind of tell you they all told me the same story. Christmas for the US right now has been halted. Production has been halted for the US. And I say for the US because factories are still open, producing for other countries, Europe, Africa, Australia. Unfortunately, the US is their biggest market. So the main Christmas companies have halted production, meaning they don't want to get their containers on the water and have these tariffs imposed at this time. So what it will be mean, I'm going to be I'm an optimistic person for those who know me, but I'm also going to be realistic. I think any of us that are in the Christmas game right now, we will be getting our products late for sure if they are coming from China. That's without a doubt. My containers are normally on the water right now, and none of them are on the water at the present time. So I'm already starting to see that it will be a 6 to an 8 week delay if we were to press the button today. If you are ordering from other companies, places like the Philippines that generally order and produce mostly fiberglass for those in Christmas, that means like the large props. If you are somebody that buys a lot of ribbon, most of the ribbon comes from India. So I have about 90% of my ribbon order already here right now. But unfortunately, most of us order a lot of stuff from China, meaning the greenery, the ornaments. So think about your vendors who you have right now. I'm encouraging communication. Don't just sit back and become kind of like, oh, well, it will come when it comes. I think you need to look at what your plans are, your plan A, your plan B, and maybe even your plan C. Because if products arriving at us late, how will that affect us when we start to fabricate, for those that fabricate? If you've got, so we have container orders at Seasonscapes. That's why we're able to wholesale our product to companies out there like you and keep our prices minimally low. If you are a company that goes to market or buys from catalogs, you're probably going to be a lot more affected. Product can be even later, or it may not come in at all. And that is literally what I'm hearing from those people, because they now may have to make a decision on what product that they sell the most of if they're going to pay those tariffs and bring that in. So hopefully that makes sense. I would suggest certainly looking at other vendors. There is a company out there that does produce ornaments out of Mexico. So if you're somebody that may not bring in hundreds of thousands of ornaments, that may be an option for you. If you don't know they're there, you can reach out to me personally. I'll happily send you that information. If you are looking for large props like lighted pieces, there's a couple of large companies out there that produce in France. There's a very large one that produces in Greece and Bulgaria. And so right now their tariff rates are a lot lower, and they can certainly, having spoken to one of them, can ramp up production and get things in. But your general hard goods, your trees, your ornaments are definitely going to be delayed. Jacob, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think some of the other things, and just kind of hitting back on the fact that we've heard that factories are shutting down, completely stopping, manufacturing in China. So, like you said, there's stuff that if it's not on the water right now, there may not be anything else that's being put on the water just from being able to purchase domestically, right? So there's going to be a limited supply of that. I also, comparing, Seasonscapes to ASI, we're looking in the Interiorscape industry. Holiday is so much more product heavy than you look at the overall value of a contractor or the service from the Interiorscape side. Right. So where I see some of the bigger areas is that holiday is going to be where Jason's saying, hey, 5 to 15, maybe if it goes up, it's 20% increase in cost. We may see a much higher from the holiday side. So we'll talk a little bit about how do we and what is Natura's strategy to help keep those costs to our end user down. But at the end of the day, what we are anticipating is a pretty high scarcity of product across the board. And so that's really what we're walking into this, this scenario, understanding that there's going to be a limited supply. Now, that also means that if your customers want it, it's time for customers to act quickly on those things and understand where we're getting it from. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty, I guess I don't want to use the word severe necessarily, but I think on the holiday side, it is a much bigger impact just based off the value of the product coming across.
Yeah.
And
I
Jacob,
also
break that down a little bit more. So you're comparing holiday and Interiorscapes, right? So we've got, our decorative containers, most of them come from China. Certainly there's a big tariff on that. What you're saying is, well, when you look at a contract, there's a lot of other components that go into making that end price. Therefore, you might be taking lower margin on, your containers, but you're able to make that up through your installation fees, your, other products that go into it, your plants, your maintenance and things like that.
I mean, exactly. It's just what you said there, that you have so many other components within your Interiorscape, your labor, your guarantee, color rotations, all those things that you have coming in, as well as you're looking at the lifetime of an ASI container. Could be 5, 6, 7, sometimes 10 years that's in there. When you're looking at holiday decor, a lot of times we're flipping that holiday annually. 2 years, hopefully 3 years, maybe we're pushing it a 4th year. But the reality is that you have the percent of cost on the product compared to the lifetime value of the customer is much, much higher in holiday, as well as the factories there are not necessarily owned by the importer. Like Jason's owns and can control that factory. Some of them are like, well, if I can't have them continuing to manufacture this stuff, if I don't know that I can sell it, right? So
right, they're making Christmas ornaments one week and they're flipping over to
water guns the next week.
Next,
Right.
The other situation that people need to be aware of is as this moves kind of week by week, if it does get that they change the tariffs to down, is that we're going to get a bottleneck, right, of containers going out. So you've got to think about all the big box stores, the Targets, the Walmarts, and all of that. It's the same factories that produce those ornaments and Christmas trees as the ones we buy from. There's very few factories out there that produce Christmas, believe it or not. So we have to think about that. And then you're looking at 6 weeks on the water. The other thing that may happen is the cost of shipping has gone down since COVID. We started to see that down almost to what we were paying pre-COVID prices, maybe $4,000 a container, something like that. And I think what we're definitely going to see, and I'm hearing this from the Christmas companies, is that as things start moving, if they start moving, and I'm being optimistic, when they start moving, is we're going to suddenly see the shipping costs go up as well. So we may be paying more on containers and not just having the tariff charges as well. So I think that's something to be very aware of as we move forward in the next few weeks. And of course, Christmas is so time sensitive, right? I mean, with Jason and ASI, people are buying containers every year. If we have a cutoff date, if we can't get Christmas supplies in by a certain time, then kind of what's going to happen. And then the other thing to think about for those of you that buy Christmas, from catalog or online, or even place your orders so they're coming in domestically to you, is that many of the bigger companies may not bring in as much product. So, just think about what may be available to you as and when you need it. So.
So
Well, just,
Caroline, we're hearing that you are delaying shipping, other big vendors are delaying shipping. When you think about the tariffs and kind of the strategy and purpose behind the tariffs are to reduce our dependence on China, which is going to be a long game, right? Which
For
that's
sure.
not going to happen right away. So are you feeling that these importers right now are feeling that in the short term there could be a change in tariff rate and not realizing that this is most likely here to stay? Or do you feel that there could be some jockeying and reduction in the short term and then they may ship in 4 to 6 weeks?
I think that's a great question. I think that they're hoping that in the next 6 to 8 weeks, there may be a change. Now, we don't know if that's going to be reduced or made even higher, right? So I did get an email from a large importer that we don't buy much from actually, and they said that they had held off bringing anything in, and they were just going to wait, and they were going to make a decision in 8 weeks what they bought in. There are some Christmas companies out there, again, I'm not going to mention names, that have as many as 30, 40 containers on the water right now. Well, they've all left with the higher tariff rate that's happened in the last couple of weeks. So yeah, we're just as an organization just looking at ways, and it's like knowing when to push that button, because we still want to be open for business, right? So and unfortunately we're very restricted because of what we purchase is not really made in many other countries. Ornaments, a very, very small amount come from Mexico. There is a couple of tree manufacturers out in Europe, but I'm not sure if they would be able to step up production for this current year.
I'll just say one note on timing. It's sort of like trying to time the market. It's very challenging to do. I mean, in my history of importing through COVID and everything, the second we were like, oh, we'll just get ahead of the curve and bring more product in before the typical holiday rush. Well, guess what? Everyone else has the same idea. Mm-hmm. And what I've found to be an effective strategy is kind of playing dumb. Like, you want to do average costing, right? So you bring in a consistent. So right now, you might get some better import rates on the freight, but you're paying tremendous duty. Now it is different in our case, the split between holiday and ASI. ASI, so much of our cost happens in the US, right? The cost of sanding in the US, the cost of painting in the US, the cost of marketing in the US, cost of doing all of the relationships, the trade shows. So it's definitely different than just importing and then turning around and handing a product over just as a straight wholesale. So it's I don't know. It's tough to time the market, and like you said, if you stop, eventually you run out of product, and then what?
Right.
So you have to keep it flowing somewhat eventually.
I see that Craig got a question. When is Natura's drop dead or Seasonscape's drop dead deadline to order? And I think for us and or Caroline, you're prepared to pull the trigger on this order. In fact, it's not done manufacturing, but as soon as that's done, prepared to pull the trigger there.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't afford to hang around and wait. And I'm just speaking as far as Seasonscapes right now. We can't. Everything was put on hold. My greenery, I could have probably shipped out in the next 3 weeks. And my ornaments, I've got 2 containers ready to put on a ship right now. So it's like, it's like looking into a crystal ball, right? You're not quite sure when, so it's nervous, but I'm determined that Christmas will not be canceled this year. So,
in Caroline, have you adjusted any of your order from what was pre-tariff? Have you reduced the order for any reason, or are you continuing to bring in the exact?
Absolutely not. And in fact, we ordered 2 more containers.
Than you did last year.
We put that order in. It's not ready. It will ship out June the 25th. So, yeah.
I mean, to be crystal clear on that, our stance is that tariffs are here to stay, at least for the next 10, 12 months. I mean, who knows? Things could get sorted out. But as Jason was alluding to, that's a gamble, and so we know Christmas is coming. We want to be prepared for it. Certainly, there's additional expense associated with that we weren't planning for, and that's really where I'd like to move the conversation into. In light of that, you can't go slap 145% increase on our product costs and then mark that up, to our customers. And Jacob, you kind of started going down that road with, on the interior side, there are other areas that we can make margin in, and it may not be the product side of holiday decor this year. And who knows what happens in, 24 months from now. But we can only, make decisions based off of the information that we have in front of us. And as unclear as that is right now, we're, looking to see what it is that we can do. So why don't we shift over there and what our priorities are and how we go about making decisions from that.
Yeah, and just real quick before we do, I want to, as we look at what Seasonscape's additional costs are, 145% tariff from to the importer is really looking at about a 96% increase in Seasonscape's costs. And there's a question here, okay, what kind of increase can we expect on that holiday decor? And I know Carolyn's kind of working through that specifically because about 32% of that is in labor in the actual fabrication of the pre-decorated decor. So as you look, through there, you can see there's, compared to what Jason was saying, hey, there's a lot of expense in, stateside. There's not as much expense stateside here. It's really the cost of that product, which we've kind of been talking about. So we're going to jump in and we'll start talking a little bit about really what Natura is doing and how we're anticipating this in the strategy moving forward. And so as this hit, we put together some priorities and say, look, what's important to the organization first? Something impactful like this is, okay, well, how do we prioritize decisions? And the number one priority is always going to be cash, right? Do we have cash in the bank? And then I identify, okay, how much runway do we have? Now, I don't anticipate or suspect or feel like this is as impactful as COVID was, specifically to our industry, but I think this is kind of the COVID for a lot of our vendors, where they may have seen an increase in sales over that period of time. We, as Interiorscapers, started to struggle, so the script is kind of flipped a little bit, but it's cash. Number two thing is people, right? We cannot do anything without the people here. And so ensuring that we're taking care of our people at the at the risk of the next one, which is revenue. And then our fourth priority is margin. And I want to be clear, we're looking at this saying, hey, we want to take we're willing to take lower margin on product to ensure that we're protecting the revenue. We are lucky and blessed enough to be in the original subscription-based industry, right? And so we're able to go in and maintain these customers from a long-term standpoint. It's important that we identify and we're looking at this, what's the lifetime value of our customer? Not, did I lose, 8 points on my gross margin with my ASI containers or whatever it comes out to be? Or did I lose, a little bit of margin dollars on my holiday decor? But it's really looking at this from a long-term standpoint for the customer. So, I think our first actions were, okay, let's talk to our vendors, making sure we have those relationships with our vendors and talking to our vendors and saying, what's going on? What are you hearing? And how is this affecting us? And then, like Josh has said this whole time, we're planning on this being, the long term, I guess, quote a COVID term, the new normal. But I think we have to anticipate that this is going to be a long-term scenario, whether it's 12 months, 18 months, or whether we're just looking at 100% tariffs, over 100% tariffs for, the rest of, foreseeable future. We need to be operating under that. And if it goes back, great, we're in a good spot. And so what I've done here, and I'm going to share my screen. I have thrown together just a quick little calculator for us to identify what does it look like if we're to come in and make adjustments with the different tariffs that are coming through from our different container vendors. And even I'm building this out for our holiday decor, but identifying really truly what does this mean to us as an industry. And when we look at what are we talking about from a dollar standpoint, I think in scenarios like this, we all have to be comfortable identifying that we're willing to take a lower gross margin, but focus on the gross profit dollars, right? If I'm willing to take a lower percentage, but maintain my dollars that are coming through and maintain the revenue that's coming through, I'm in a good position here. So I've got a calculator here, and I will be sending this out to the attendees if you guys want to get in and play with it. And just looking at some different assumptions that we have here. We have labor rate at $80 an hour. You can plug this in yourself. A markup of 2.5 on containers. If we're leasing, are we charging a lease financing fee? We should be, right? We should be charging a lease financing fee per year. How long is the term? And then this is what Jason was talking about, increased cost of the tariff compared to our product cost. So if we have, he said 5 to 15%, I'm going to go with 20% just to make sure we're comfortable here. And then I can go and plug in what's my original cost of the product. Say it's $1,000 worth of order. Then I can identify what would I want to increase my customer base on this product. We have to understand what our market will bear. Will our market bear a 5% increase on containers when containers are just a small component to the overall contract value, and saying like this really is not that big of an impact in this. And then we're going to look at some labor efficiencies too, because we know the labor is really our biggest cost. And so it's how, like Jason said, it's not how, it's how do I get better at what I'm doing in these other areas to help support what those increased expenses are. And we know that in tough times is really times where we get better, is where we innovate. And so this is an area to sit down and say, how can I fine tune and get better at all the other things that I'm doing? Let me pull in here just a little bit to make it a little bit larger. So you can see here, I've got a column of my original costs, the cost at $1,000, selling price, I have a 2.5 markup. So say I run a 2.0 mark. You can see how that affects that.
You're in the wrong period.
Oops.
Go back to
My,
row 24.
Here. It's a little off on my screen here. You can see my gross profit on that product. It's $1,500. Now, what is my lease? What am I charging the customer per month for that for a 36-month? Maybe I'm charging the customer $86. And you can see you're actually generating a large profit for that product, that $1,000 on product over the course of 36 months with a gross margin of 60%. Now, if I come in here and I want to say, I'm going to just run a 5% price increase, you can see that 5% price increase where I have a 20% increase on my costs, a 5% price increase to the customer. Over the course of 36 months, I've only lost $45 less than what I would have sold that at previously. The idea behind this is identifying what can my market absorb from an increase in price. Our customers these are easy conversations to have. Our customers are expecting those increases across the board. But if we're able to come to say, look, yeah, prices have actually gone up by about 5% for the containers, plants haven't gone up at all these other areas, it's a very, very easy conversation to have. And so, as we walk into this, we feel like this is easy to do. In fact, for us, we were looking at a 6% increase on a 30%, and say, okay, look, I'm comfortable there if I do a 6% increase on the 30% cost.
So Jacob, what I hear you saying is I love the priorities you put out, putting cash first, protecting cash because that's a healthy organization, then people, and then looking at customers, being able to take care of that recurring revenue and keep that solid. and be willing to take fewer margin dollars and percentage points. Because if we're able to protect the cash, we'll still get the cash coming through, but because of the tariff, it's almost like we're not marking up the cost of the tariff, right?
Right.
We're going to let that be a pass through, and we'll operate at a lower profit margin, but the same dollars that we would have had before or close to it.
Right.
But we're just not going to make margin on that tariff increase itself.
Right, exactly. We're gonna have to shift all these percentages that we had in our head as a good, strong percentage and identify, look, we need to identify what margin dollars. The other component to this, we have to know what our overhead is. We have to know what we have to recoup in overhead costs to be able to get to that point. Because if our overhead is such, then we need to make sure that we're getting to the place of ensuring that we're turning the net profit. So knowing those overhead expenses is critical.
So even though it looks like a horrible 8% drop in gross margin, it's only $114 over 3 years.
Over 3 years.
So
right.
Yeah, it's
now. If you're to give up that $114, you're actually losing on thousands of dollars from a service side, right? So from the labor side. So what I did was I actually took a example quote. It was about $450 a month on a 36-month lease. It was right around $1,000 in product costs. And so as we've looked at that, there's different ways that we can start to break this out and say, look, where then can we get efficient? And where do we focus on better margins? And I think, again, this is where the rubber meets the road of saying, if I'm not willing to, and even, let me go back up here and just say, I'm going to take out, I'm not going to increase at all. I'm going to have a 30% increase in my product cost. So say the kind of worst case scenario, I need to understand what my service cycle is too, because that's the bigger component. Going back to how we compared Interiorscapes with Holiday, there's so much more from a labor component here. So if I go back and look at my labor revenue, and let me caveat this with how we are focused on selling here is not a time and material. It's not a cost plus. We get to what we need from a margins by calculating those things. But we as Interiorscapers, we sell an environment. And what's the value of that environment to our customers? We don't sell our time. We shouldn't be promising the customers that I'm going to be in your account for 3 hours on every 2 weeks. Because what happens when we go over? We don't go and charge the customer, right? When we have to spend extra time there, we're working to be under that time. So we're working on those efficiencies. So we need to get to a place where we're charging the customer based off the value of the service that we provide, not our time and material, right? So as we look at this and shifting from a 2-week cycle to, well, we know we can go a 4-week cycle and actually have a healthier environment. It's walking through all this math. You're running actual $600, $621 more in your labor gross profit than you are on a 2-week cycle. So understanding that over that period of time, I'm actually netting a higher gross margin on that contract. Again, this is a little probably overcomplicated in this, but the idea is understanding that when we're looking at these ASI containers or any containers with increased costs, it's a minor cost to us to increase that. And we have to shift our mindset from thinking about what's my highest, percent in gross margin that I can possibly squeeze out of this, and say some of these things we need to shift and understand, okay, I want to make sure I'm retaining the dollars that are coming out of this project, the dollars that are coming out of that project. Because at the end of the day, 60% gross margin of $0 is still $0.
Yeah.
And so if we're increasing our price too much that we're losing business out of it, it doesn't matter what my quoted gross margin was.
Yeah.
So
even though we're having increased costs on a component of our contract component, we also have the ability through Jason and John Pierre at ASI to go with the Volcaponic to extend to the 4-week service cycles and be able to net those savings.
Take this to what Jason was saying at 15%, and let's take our price increase to 5%. we're actually making money on this, right? We actually have a higher margin here from a dollar standpoint.
Yeah.
I think what's important here is that we identify how are we not trying to make money on the tariffs, but saying, guys, this is the pass-through. And that's ultimately the way that we are approaching this. So as we walk through, say, hey, what are key takeaways as an organization here? We evaluate the whole picture, know the lifetime value of our customer, selling on the environment, not on cost plus or time and material. We've got to sell the service on the environment and know your markups. Again, product cost is only one component to that price. We should not be scared of a 145% tariff to ASI as we actually go down and do the math, right? We're going to do the math and we're going to figure out what does this actually mean to our customer. And at the end of the day, it's not this massive increase. Evaluate what your market will bear from a price increase standpoint. Take lower margin on containers to retain the revenue and labor. Again, retain that revenue. It's critical to be to retain the revenue in these jobs. As we know, we've got the recurring piece, and that comes into our cash flow, right? That also comes into our people. If we're not protecting that revenue, then we're losing people. Other options: increase a 4-week service cycle to increase gross margin. Like I said, 60% of $0 is still $0. I think identifying too, not every cost that the customer sees is tariffed, and that kind of goes back to what is that mix and that breakdown of cost to or the product to everything else that goes into it. Jason explained it really well, and I know Caroline's got components in this that don't get afraid of a 145% tariff. Do the math, talk to your vendors, and figure out, okay, what does this actually mean to me here, and understand that. And then again, know where you are within that supply chain. Know, okay, what is that first cost where is that first cost applied to coming through? Knowing that, again, it's not increasing our cost by 145%. I think that's where a lot of people get fearful here is that's not the case. It's something that is very manageable as we walk through the interior side. Again, as we come back and talk about holiday is slightly different just because it's heavier in the product side. But Mike and I were working through some different scenarios that we see, and based off of what we're identifying, it may be a 10.4% increase in our price to our customers, right? And we're still pulling the same gross profit dollars from each item.
And that's because a typical 3-year lease, we have 3 years of leasing to recover that, and the material cost just a component of the installation labor, the takedown labor, annual storage, and all that. So it's not as scary as you might think it is. It could be end up 10%, 11% increase to the customer.
Yes, I think it's about thinking big picture, thinking long term, and truly thinking and identifying what is the lifetime value of this customer as we get into these projects and say, look, I'm going to take a lower margin here and I have to be comfortable with that.
And that's, again, passing the tariff costs through at cost and not thinking you're going to mark it up because it's part of your direct cost.
Right.
Well,
Yeah,
I love
just
it.
wanna
I mean,
say, the vendor, I really appreciate your long-term view on it, right? I mean, it gives us more time to get our production shifted over and bring the cost back down. And they're just directly related to the tariffs. Like you guys saying, you're not going to mark it up. I'm not marking it up either. So we're trying to minimize the cost of that to the end user at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think the long-term, play from an industry standpoint is that we also don't want just our customer base to start thinking that our services are just too expensive, and so there's always a value proposition for our customers, and at some point that's going to pass. And if we look at tariffs as something that, this is another, I'm going to mark it up just like I mark up the container, or like I mark up the plant, or like I mark up labor, we're going to end up pricing ourselves out of the industry. And so it's important to think about it as just a pass through.
Well, I love the discussion and certainly, there's a lot, Jacob, you're going to share out the sheet and certainly more to come and certainly a lot of things that could change from day to day. But one thing that we absolutely have full control over is our headspace, and we're hearing from a lot of people that, it's just like doom and gloom, like this is horrible for our industry. And the reality is you got to dig into it. And there certainly are always things that you can do in how we're positioning and posturing, not just ourselves as leaders, but the decisions that we're making, the information that we're communicating to our team, and ultimately, what's getting in front of our customers. And there's a lot of things that we can do. Jacob shared, a lot of them with how we're just looking at this additional expense and how we're focusing on gross margin dollars versus percentage. And then how are we just getting better? How are we getting more efficient in how we're doing what it is that we do? That's not a bad thing. This arguably could be a very good thing, for our industry. And that's at Natura where we are choosing to focus, making sure that we understand everything that's going into it. And just wanted to share that with everybody who wanted to join the call. So we're going to open it up to questions and answers. And again, I don't have that in front of me right now. Do we have any hands raised?
Yes, Serena.
Yeah, hi everyone. Irina from One Big Green here. Thank you very much for gathering everyone for this important discussion. And as a European, I want to say I'm really sorry for the industry that this is happening. No matter the long-term effect of everyone's going to suffer the short term. But I'm here with something else. So many of you know me as a founder of One Big Green. But aside from that, I also own a landscaping company in Ukraine for the last 18 years. And at the last TPAE, I was actually given a talk on crisis management. I had no idea this would be coming. So these were a little bit different angle. My point is, so my company is 18 years old and we've been through a lot of economic turbulence. So we kind of worked out the, how do you say that, the workflow, how to assess the macroeconomic factors, how to predict them, how to anticipate them, how to adapt internally within the company, how to work with your suppliers because everyone is mutually dependent, and most importantly, what to do inside the company operationally speaking, something that Jacob was talking about, to actually make sure that the company doesn't go belly up with all this macroeconomic turbulence. So I wanted to ask, I know that's really weird coming from a Ukrainian, but these are the lessons that I happen to have. Would that be interesting or useful for the industry if perhaps I could share it as a webinar, so all these operational lessons that could help companies, interiorscaping companies, namely, stand through the turbulence and prepare for the better future. Would that be interesting?
Absolutely. I think this is a great format to keep conversations like this going. So I'll reach out to you and we can schedule that. That would only be helpful to every one of us as, we've been faced with more and more of this.
I would love some cooperation, Josh, and if that is interesting, maybe we can do some questionnaire, because I know the lessons that I wanted to share, but maybe people have questions like, how do you do the long-term offers, proposals? How do you make sure that you don't run the accounts at loss, the service accounts, the sale proposals? Maybe we can just launch a sort of questionnaire. I will suggest some subjects that I think would be valuable, and the audience will share what they want to know, because trust me, we've been through a lot of economic trouble. We're fully import dependent in Ukraine. We are facing hyperinflation, so your labor cost is not a constant. So I will be happy to share that because I'm deeply committed to the industry, and hopefully that can help you guys.
We very much appreciate that. I'll reach out to you shortly after and we'll get that conversation going. Thank you.
Nora.
I was just curious about how much ASI inventory is readily available. I mean, like how many months out do you have like your core products, your Phoenixes, your Europeans, your Earths? How much core product do you predict that you have in stock currently for like how many months of like normal business cycles that you're getting orders for? I'm just curious.
Sure.
Good question.
I mean, we hold pretty large inventories. We have probably around 100 container loads of product in our warehouses. The question is, this varies item by item. We use statistics to try and figure out what the right amount is to hold. And we look at things like standard deviation. But so it's a little bit hard to answer because it could depend on each item. Of course, we try and stay in stock on the key items. We aim for around 2 to 3 inventory turns a year. And so that's what we would have in stock. The question, though, that I believe is behind this, correct me if I'm wrong, Laura, is like, when would we have to start passing along such an increase? And the reality is, once we're being faced with the charges, and the reason for that is, the second we sell an earth wall, we have to buy a new one, right, to replace it, else we won't have stock. Well, that new one that we bought just got hit with the tariff. So it's a little bit of an accounting exercise, LIFO, FIFO, but the reality is we wouldn't be able to bankroll and prepay duties on all of our inventory, 100 container loads, for example. So it would be pretty immediate.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so
That's not to cause panic. Hopefully, I think the Natura team has definitely done a very enlightening job for me as well in the way that you think about pricing.
And Jason, we've seen that consistent with other vendors saying starting immediately there's an increase on a tariff increase even for things that are already in the stateside from that specific standpoint is to replace it. They've got
you got to
the costs have already gone.
You got to put it back on the shelf. And what is the cost to put it back on the shelf?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We had one of our employees went to go buy workout clothes, and tariffs were line itemed right there on the receipt. This was like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, the IEPAs are already in there, right? So ASI is just handling that cost internally as of right now. But at any rate.
I just got a message from our VP of HR, Heather. Many of you know her. She's traveling right now, but she asked to mention something about how we're having these conversations internally with our team to ensure that they have reassurance as to the fact that things are going well. These are things that are being addressed. Anytime there's something in the news that is this impactful, the first question is, what does this mean for me? And so understanding that as we decided, hey, these are our priorities, we said, hey, team, these are our priorities, and this is what we are protecting. Even from how are we going to go about pricing? What is the pricing strategies? Specifically from our sales team, who a big portion of their compensation is in commissions, right? It's what they sell. And if saying, hey, prices are going to go up and it's going to be more difficult for me to sell, our conversations have been of protecting our price levels as much as we possibly can so that we can be out there selling just like we have in years past. It's important to have that reassurance to the team.
Good point.
Great.
I know, I'm not sure there's somebody on this call that could address this question, but what can we expect at all our plant prices to be increasing? Are they going to be the subject of the same kinds of tariffs you're talking about, or much lesser tariffs?
That's a great question. I think their exposure is a little bit less, but we all know that, a lot of routings and things come outside of the US. So we can certainly circle back with that. I imagine that we'll see some sort of impact. As we were approaching all of this, we just felt like it was quite a bit less than what we were seeing as things directly coming from China with, 145. And as Jason has said, it's actually about 150%. So great question, Craig. We'll circle back on that.
Thank you.
I would anticipate that you will see something, but it should be very minor if you think about where that is in the supply chain of those cuttings coming through. And then we talk about the amount of expense that is stateside. The majority of expense for a grower is stateside and not subject to tariff. So it may be very minor.
I mean, cuttings from Central America are like couple of cents per cutting, so it's pennies, and you have a 20% tariff on pennies. It's not much. Perhaps bromeliad, the tissue cultured cells coming in from Europe might be impacted, but I think in general our larger containerized floor plants are American grown. We cannot import finished plants with the USDA restrictions on importing finished products. So I would think minimal. Great question to follow up on though.
Karina.
That may be
from was that an old one?
Yeah, I was going to share on the cost of the plants, because what I've seen so far with our situation, so the cost of the plants might not be directly affected by the tariffs, but it does correlate with the labor cost primarily, and the energy cost. And something that I briefly mentioned, the labor cost, if the situation with tariffs stays long for a long time, let's say a year or 2 years, whatnot, the labor cost will go up, because the same people will have to pay higher costs for whatever consumer goods that they're consuming. So the labor cost will go up. So might be a slight delay, let's say half a year or a year, but the cost of the plants will go up proportionally as the aftermath from reduced buying capability of people. Hope that helps, Craig.
Thank you.
And watch the energy prices.
All right, any other hands raised or questions asked out there? All right, well, very good. I hope this has been insightful for you as much as it has been for us. Again, I just want to encourage you guys, it's you can take one of two roads, just kind of a negative doom and gloom, or just realize like, hey, we're in business and there's risks associated with that, but that's why we're leaders. We're here to look at the facts in front of us, make a decision. It may not be the right one, but when we get to where that put us, we'll make the next right one. And so we know that when we do this collectively, we're all going to be better off. And so appreciate just allowing us to share what it is that we know, and looking forward to doing this again in the near future with other topics as they come up. So thank you guys. The recording will be made available to you. In fact, it might just shoot right out to you after we wrap this up. And then, Jacob, you've got a spreadsheet that you're going to send out for everyone to kind of poke around in. I do believe the chat will stay live. So if there's any thoughts, comments, questions that come up after the fact, by all means, comment in there, or you can just reply to the email that you sent, and I'll make sure that we're able to get that out to everybody. So really appreciate y'all's time today. You guys go out and make it a great Monday, and we will talk to you all very soon.
Thank you.
Jason, thank you. Thanks for the insights. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you to all of you.
Hey,
And
Jacob, thank you.
I'll stay on in case anybody has any additional questions.
Excellent.